Well, good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m., August 10th, 2023, and I'd like to welcome everyone here in the room and those participating online as I call to order this meeting of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education for the purpose of conducting the school district's business. We value everyone's input and have made sure to dedicate a portion of this meeting to hear from you. We look forward to your comments during that time as indicated on our agenda. Mr. Lyman, will you please kick us off? Call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Carpenter is absent. Mrs. Dorn?
Present.
Mr. Kinsey?
Present.
Mr. Price is absent. Mrs. Anderson?
Present.
We have a quorum. If you're able, will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Lyman, will you please give the treasurer's report?
I think I'll get a motion to approve the minutes from the July 13th meeting.
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Dolan. Comments, corrections, questions? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Could I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report for the month of July?
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Dorn and then Mrs. Anderson.
I don't really have anything to report from that. Reports included with your agenda and on the website. Does anyone have any questions about anything that is contained therein? I will say that the pie chart for revenues is odd looking because we did receive almost all of our real estate tax money for the second half settlement in July. So it looks like we're getting 90% of our revenue from real estate taxes just because of the timing of the receipts.
Not hearing any questions, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Could I get a motion to approve the amendment to the new fiscal year 24 final appropriations to add federal grants to the appropriations in the amount of $876,809.31?
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Dorn and then Mrs. Anderson.
That list is included with the agenda also.
Not hearing any questions, please call the roll.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
And could I request approval of the then announced certificate for PO 4240463 to TransFinder Corporation for $3,900 for new transportation bus routing software?
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Dorn. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Anything else, sir?
No.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to items for correspondence.
I just wanted to give a correspondence update. I was speaking with Pastor Willie Cox from Bellbrook Community Church. He wanted me to let everyone know that 150 of our students were served with backpacks and full supplies. They were able to go shopping in their supply bins so that all of them received full outfitted shoes, haircuts, backpacks, everything ready to go for school. So 150, and thank you to Mike and our transportation department. He rolled up with a brand new bus. So everybody got to go on it. So thank you, Dr. Cozad and Henry, for arranging that.
I had something I wanted to share just because you guys weren't there. I was privileged enough this week to attend some training put on by the Ohio School Safety Center, and they're a government agency that falls under the Ohio Department of Public Safety. It's really great. Not all, but some of the topics covered: de-escalation techniques, communication strategies, psychology of critical incidents, crisis intervention. But I just wanted to share with you that the government officials who were there, the instructors who were there, actually called us out by name a couple times and wanted to commend Bellbrook and actually thank the district for the creation of the active shooter response team. It's kind of neat to be called out by name and thanked for that. So I know we have an agenda item later on that addresses that, so I just thought I would share that with you. Okay, reports to the board.
Yes, so Mr. Lemming and I are going to discuss the riveting topic of House Bill 33, which is state budget bill, biennium budget bill, 2-year budget bill. And so we get to know solidly every 2 years what our budget will be. Beyond that, we do not know what our budget will be, even though we need to do a 5-year forecast. It's a little ironic, but we go ahead and go on here. Mr. Lyman and I are going to tag team this. So I'll take the first part of this. There we go. So Department of Education and Workforce. So creates the Department of Education and Workforce. The DO is what they're calling it, and transfers most of the duties from the State Board of Education to this state-appointed cabinet level position. And so the State Board of Education mostly is left to licensing and some of those kind of things. But everything else is really at the cabinet level with the DO. And within the two, there are also 2 deputy directors. It was written into the law that the 2 deputy directors have to be educators. The director does not have to be an educator, but the 2 deputy directors have to have some type of educational background, which makes a little sense since it's the department or the Department of Education and Workforce. And so full transfer of those duties will be in the 90 days of the bill's effective date. So about December. Again, there's no word on who that new cabinet level director or who the deputy level directors are. So impact on Bellbrook-Sugarcreek, again, at this point, it's too early to determine what really the impact on us is. The do in this is probably going to be more efficient, but a dictatorship is very efficient also. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the best or that also, but again, it can be with the winds of whoever's in the governor's office. So this could do some shifts and changes depending on who is in the governor's office. So it's really too early to determine what kind of impact that this will have on education. Ed choice vouchers. This is a big piece that has slowly, we know the story of the frog and slowly boiling in the water. That's kind of what the voucher situation has been for the past 5, 10, 15 years, is creating these vouchers. And now essentially it's a universal eligibility. So anybody, regardless of poverty level or income level, can get some level of funding. So students are not required to have attended a public school in the past. So if someone's in a private school right now, they are eligible for this voucher, but can be used for attending another public school. The maximum voucher amounts, which are based on statewide averages, base cost is about $8,400 for high school and about $6,100 for K-8 school or students. So those amounts are coming directly from the state. They're not deducted from our funding formula. So there's 2 kind of separate pots of money, those that go to public education, those to go to the vouchers. They aren't overlapping as sometimes in the past that they would be deducted from ours and so forth, but that is not the case now. They're 2 separate pots of money. Ironically enough, our state share is about $3,400, so those that are vouchers are getting much, those schools are getting much more than we would get for a particular student. So those students that are those families that are 450% of the poverty level, they receive the full funding. And so that's about $135,000 for a family of 4. They would receive that full amount. And then it's really just kind of prorated down. And the minimum is about $600, $617 for K-8, about $841 for high school. So everybody is at least eligible for those amounts if they are going to a private school. Requires student growth measures to be developed for the Ed Choice voucher, and that data to be reported annually, but there's no consequences for that, whether the kids are growing or not growing or whatever the data is. There's really no accountability measures. With this $826 million, a 76% increase, there's really no accountability for the private schools for this. And so if you've known from the past, that's kind of the point that the state has always said about the report card, is that we have all this public money. State public schools need to be accountable for all that money, yet with vouchers, there is no accountability in regard to increasing student achievement, increasing student growth with that money. So whether it's working or not, there's really no accountability measures. So impact on Bellbrook-Sugarcreek, again, you're kind of seeing the theme here, kind of the overview of what it is, and then trying to determine what the impact is on us locally. We could lose students to private schools. That's one thing we could lose those students. And the bigger picture is money is being shifted away from, being shifted to private schools away from public schools. So right now, the state is flush with cash. They are doing well. The state is really doing well. Those horror stories of 2 or 3 years ago with COVID wrecking the economy and all that, that is not the case in Ohio. They are millions and millions and millions of dollars over what their projected surpluses are. So right now, this works. There's enough money in the pot to do private vouchers and the public money. But as we know, we live in a capitalistic society. Our economy, at some point, it's going to dive or crash, or not crash, but dive and up and down. That's just the cyclical cycle that we live in. So at that point, it'll be really interesting to see what hard choices the state's going to have to make. But again, anytime you give money out like that, it's going to be really hard to pull it back. And anytime you give money like that, government money, cost of things magically go up. And so that efficient use of money may not be there. So again, also no accountability for public tax dollars. So I already covered that. And again, as we could lose students to private schools, whether we're going to lose money or not, that's going to be in a later slide here with Mr. Lyman. He's going to cover that piece. So literacy in a third grade reading guarantee. So again, budget bill. Again, a lot of these bills, a lot of these things were in different bills, and then, you know, as they come together to try to compromise at the end there, they throw all these things in. As long as they have some type of funding piece, they can all be funneled into a budget bill at the end. So, you know, you're kind of like, why is literacy and third grade reading guarantee in the budget bill? Well, there's funding involved into it, so it can go into the budget bill. So it maintains retention for the third grade reading guarantee, but essentially it creates an exemption from students whose parents, in consultation with the reading teacher, the principal, agree that the student should be promoted to fourth grade, but still receive intervention services. So essentially, if everybody's saying it's best interest of the student to go into fourth grade, regardless of what they scored on the third grade test or the alternate test, they can still go on. The state is providing $174 million to support curriculum purchases and PD that align to the science of reading. So that is going to be a spend and get reimbursed kind of situation. It's not going to be retroactive to previous years. And so we've already, you know, started going down this road of trying to get ahead of the curve and trying to be proactive in this, yet the money that we have spent in the past won't be reimbursable. And so there's going to be stipends for PD and money for those curriculum purchases. When I asked, is this going to be state share? Because normally anytime we get something from the government or the state, they say, this is the amount of money. And then we say, well, what about us? And they'll say, well, it's 27% of the actual amount. It's not really. But I have not seen the amount, but that is not the case with this. How they're determining money in each district, I don't know that piece. But but it's not based on state share, so hopefully we will get some money for those curriculum purchases. There are amounts for stipends for teachers and so forth that go along with this.
Is there anything pointing to when we might, or when all schools might find that out, or just wait and see?
Wait and see at this point of trying to see how that all flushes out, because I don't know. I asked at BASA, which is the state level superintendents, and he did not provide the particular amount for the curriculum purchases. They're supposed to be coming out with vetted resources in January of '24 that would qualify for these curriculum purchases with the science of reading. And we are heading down that road of looking at our ELA resources and so forth. So good timing, but January is a little late as we're trying to look into those things. But hopefully we can cash into those curriculum purchases into the state amount of money. I would assume it's going to be based on, if it's not on the state share, it's going to be based on some level of money per student, would be my best guess. All right, Mr. Lyman, you are up for school funding.
One thing I wanted to state on a previous slide about vouchers, and that is that you mentioned they're not deducted from our state funding. But in my opinion, we're increasing $826 million out of the state budget for voucher system. And that money is coming from the source that funds school districts. I don't care if it's two separate pots or not, makes less money available, so to speak, in the future for public schools. So I feel like that's the impact, even though nothing is directly deducted at this point from our funding. What does that do to our future? As far as school funding, from this, we find that the fair school funding plan has been phased in. So even though it increases in fiscal year 23, 24, and 25, it's just about 2/3 of the way phased in after 3 years. The amount in the budget to go to education has an 11.7% increase, but because of the demographics of this district, we get, I would guess, about a 0.1% increase, 1/10 of 8%. The average in the state, though, is 11.7. That's always nice to know. The most important 4 words in this entire presentation for our district financially is the line that says maintains all existing guarantees, because we are on the guarantee, and that means that we are basically frozen in, not precisely frozen, but all the numerous items that affect state funding. Most of them are frozen for our district. We have a few above that line. For instance, special education transportation costs, a percentage of that is reimbursed, and that can go up and down. But we are on the guarantee, and that means that as our property values increase or as our student enrollment decreases, normally our funding would be going down big time from the state. But we hit a level there in their formula where it becomes a guarantee. And we are not funded now on how many kids that we have in the district. We're funded on this flat guarantee. Therefore, the impact directly on our finances on a $35 million budget in fiscal year 24 is $36,663, and fiscal year 25, $52,052 increase. And those are estimates, of course, but that is, you can see what percentage that is of 35 million. So basically, it does affect the financial aspect of this, in my opinion, is just about no effect whatsoever. Just a very, very, very small increase there. So the point, though, is keep in mind for future discussions on any subject, extra kids does not mean extra funding from the state when you're on the guarantee. And if we get on this other way of funding school districts, the formula, that means it is funded. We are funded by how many kids we have. And the way you get on the formula is you increase your students, decrease your property values. If that doesn't happen here, I think we're still pretty well into the guarantee. In other words, the guarantee's here and we're here. If we have lower property values and increase in students, we may increase to here, but we're still on the guarantee. We haven't got to that level yet where we get off of it. And then when you're on the formula, you fluctuate a lot more. At least with the guarantee, it's easier to budget. We know pretty much where state funding is going to be in the future. So there are good and bad things to being on that guarantee. I did know there's one aspect that isn't even listed in this entire presentation that I read elsewhere concerning, I don't think it's in here, about the teacher salary schedule. Is there anything that presented in here about that? I didn't see it on that same
Minimum
page.
salary?
Right, minimum salary schedule. That wouldn't affect us at all, but there's a little line on that too that says, the state share on this budget will now not be allowed to fall below 10%. And I was, one of these days, I want to have a discussion with Kevin Price about that, because he's always talking about how we're 25% or so for state funding revenue, and they guarantee we won't fall below 10.
Oh, that's nice.
It's just, I thought that was kind of
That's
funny.
generous.
I think we're very, very low at 25, so I can imagine we do 10. Any questions about that page?
So,
Can I-
so basically we could get a whole, like, classroom worth of students and have to add a teacher for them, and we're not paid any more money, correct?
Right.
Okay.
But we could also lose the whole classroom full of kids to private schools based on vouchers and still get the same budget that
Right.
we have now as well. Is that
Right, so
standard?
it's,
I'm not saying that that's something that we should shoot
Right.
for, but I'm like,
it's good or bad, depending on,
Right.
bad, good, the situation you just brought up.
we're senior citizens on fixed income is what we are.
Yeah, years ago, I interviewed at a district, and the superintendent told me that for 25 consecutive years, they've had declining enrollment. And they think that's wonderful. They've been able to have smaller classrooms, close a building that they didn't need, that cost a lot of money, and they run the guarantees because of their property values. So,
I think that's a goal we should have, but, I mean, it's good to be able to understand. A lot of people think as we get more students, that's more money, or if we build more houses, it's more money. Or as we lose students, we got you, well, stick it to the district, and that's also not true, that we're basically flat.
right, because it would be easy to see what you brought up about, when Heidi was talking about if we have a big new development that brings us a lot of kids, we possibly have to hire new teachers and find room and more supplies and everything like that without any additional state funding.
So it's safe to say that for any additional money, the state is not the place to look for that. It is reliant still on local funding, whether that's property taxes, income levels with the funding formula. That'd be safe to say, Kevin.
Right,
Because other districts are getting a lot more money than us, but
Just a couple miles down the road.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because their state share is
Right.
much different than ours, so.
even when we had state funding cuts during COVID, we were cut more than other districts because of our state share. It happened the other way.
Yeah.
If we're gonna have cuts, we're cut more. If we're gonna have increases, we get less than comparatively speaking. So,
And then can I just make a request, and I imagine you probably will, but will you please keep an eye on that macro view of you explained how we might lose the guarantee by increasing number of enrollments, decreasing property value? Can you just give us a heads up if you see that coming? So, I appreciate it.
right, we'll do. That's a very big key to this district to the
Right.
funding level. Yeah.
Okay. All right, transportation requires the DO, which is the Department of Education Workforce, to develop the bus driver flex career path model to create a pathway for bus drivers to work at educational aides or student monitors. Details are to be determined on that. We are doing things already like that in our district, where we have a couple bus drivers that are aides, or we have bus drivers that are lunch aides. So we're already trying to have that bus driver be able to make more money, have more of a full-time job rather than a split job of only limited hours. So we're already trying to do things like that. Establishes non-compliance penalties at 5 consecutive days or 10 cumulative. Authorized districts to use 9-passenger vans to transport private school and community school students. In the past, it had to be a school bus. This creates more stress on local districts as, if there's an uptick in private school students, we could increase, that could increase the stress level on our school district with van drivers, with bus drivers. because of those Ed Choice vouchers. We haven't really seen that yet, but again, it's early on here in the whole voucher piece. But the transportation non-compliance penalties, those really are focused mainly on the big eight, the bigger school districts, the urban school districts who have a lot of their kids going to charter schools, going to private schools, and they have the same bus driver shortage that we have, but they just have exponentially people going all over the place. So as other school districts are struggling, they will be, it's always a struggle at the beginning of the year to challenge, challenge. First couple of weeks of school with bus drivers or with bus routes of getting kids home on time and all of that, just because, that fluctuates and just, it's always a little slower at the beginning of the school year, but some districts, it's going to be a challenge just because of the limited number of bus drivers, and these vouchers are really, kids are going all over the place in other school districts.
And do we do that in lieu of transportation, so that fee would still come from us, even if they're on a voucher, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't impact
Yep.
our-
Yeah. It would impact it more if there's new kids, yes,
Right,
for existing kids,
right.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of miscellaneous in here. Changes, if you're around education long enough, pendulum swings back, and we are back on the pendulum swing of grade band licenses and grades PK to 8 and 6 to 12. So this is what it was 20, 25 years ago. And so then it went to PK 3 and 4 to 9 and 7 to, or 6 to 12, 7 to 12. And now it has swung back to PK to 8 and 6 to 12 to get a lot more flexibility to the school district. This is beneficial to us and to teachers. They just, instead of being boxed into a particular number of grades, now it is much, much broader. And also it allows us to have somebody be able to teach 2 grade levels outside of their grade band for no more than 2 years, but you can renew that. So that gives a little bit more flexibility, which is as the teacher shortage becomes even stronger out there, even more prevalent, this allows us a lot more flexibility with this going forward with new graduates. We'll see how they work this with existing folks. They're probably going to have to pick one. If you're a PK to 3 person with the 4 or 5 endorsement, you're probably going with the K to 8. With your 4 to 9, you're going to have to pick something. You're going to have to pick PK to 8 or 6 to 12. They have not come out with those details of how they're going to do that.
Okay, so,
Yep.
sorry.
Go ahead.
So I thought this just applied to new teachers coming out of school, but we think it is gonna be kind of retroactive to apply to.
Well, as
existing
people are renewing their licenses,
Upon
Yeah,
upon
when-
license renewal.
yeah, when they're going to renew the license, these are the only 2 bands that are going to be out there. So at some point, they're going to have to choose which way they're going to go.
Got
Again, the details of that haven't been, maybe they don't get to choose. Maybe the state will say, hey, if you're in this particular, you need to do this. I don't know. That's a challenge. I mean, this is really good for us for BCI in the middle school where they get caught in the middle of all of this licensure thing, especially at BCI. They have PK to 3, and then they have, the 4 to 9. So they're right in the middle of that. Same thing with the middle school. If someone has PK to 3, 4 to 5 endorsement, the 6 to 12, this will much help them rather than the 4 to 9. 6 to 12. Mixed permit, the temporary authorization for us to hire subs without a bachelor's degree. We're already doing that. They allowed us for the past 2 years to be able to do that. So ours is a tier 3 or the equivalent is where we've set that. That is a local decision. Requires schools to accept cash payments at athletic events. So we have been cashless for 2 or 3 years. So we are now going to be accepting cash at our athletic events. Also requires public and private schools that enroll girls in any grades 6 to 12 to provide free feminine hygiene products to those students. I know we've had a club that has been providing those, so public and private schools are going to be doing that. Provides $12 million for the school safety training grants. I do not have details on that. Those details hopefully will be coming out soon. Homeschooling exemption from compulsory attendance shifts from separate superintendent approval to superintendent acknowledgement. So there was particular details that if someone wanted to go to homeschool, they had to, what curriculum they're using, they had to do a one-year assessment, or say a teacher needs to say, yes, they've met the standards in this particular grade. Those things have gone away, and essentially, if you want to be homeschooled, you tell the school district you're homeschooling, and that's it. So, requires schools to create individual seizure plans and training. So again, we already have those kind of things in place, and the training is going to be for all, for staff. We already have that in public school works going forward here. Mrs. Sigmund's working on that. And then also school counselors at the high school level will be doing some professional development on construction trades. And so, again, I think this is a push to try to bridge that gap between job skills and the jobs and schools, and getting them more educated about all those possibilities out there. Again, that course or PD has not been, to my knowledge, created yet. So impact on Bellbrook-Sugarcreek is a lot more flexibility in teacher licensing. But again, more unfunded mandates regards to the seizure training, hygiene products, and the counselor training. Those, even if the state provides that PD, we still have to, maybe send them somewhere, or unless it's online. And so those are some unfunded mandates. More accounting measures for taking cash at the gate. So, convenience-wise, cash sometimes for some folks is much more convenient to credit card, but for accounting reasons, much easier to account for with credit card transactions than cash. So, more accounting measures with that.
That goes in.
So
No, I want to say it's October when we have to start taking cash.
they are doing it from the beginning. We're doing it from the beginning. Yep. So I know it's a lot. Try to get through that quickly. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Yeah, there was a lot in there. A lot in that budget bill. So I think they passed it on the last day of June, was their deadline. So, okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, open communication period. Your thoughts and comments are welcome during this time. When given the floor, please share your name, address, and any group affiliation you hold if it's relevant. You will then have 5 minutes for your comments, which should be directed towards the presiding officer, who tonight happens to be me. I still like to give the speech though. People know the policy there. In case you're wondering, the reason for these policies, which can be read in their entirety on the district's website, policy number 169.91, is to ensure that everyone who wishes to speak has time to do so, and that every speaker is treated equally and fairly. And tonight, we don't have anybody who wishes to give public comments. So we will move on to our consent agenda tonight. Dr. Kozak?
Yep. So we're going to do consent agenda, new business. 7A, certificated license employment resignation leave of absence or supplemental duty. 7B, support staff employment resignation leave of absence. And then C, substitute teachers, school nurses, substitute support staff employment. And then also B and C on the hand care. So 7A, B, and C, and the hand care.
Do I have a motion to accept tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Anderson and then Mrs. Dorn. Questions?
Just to highlight a few things if I can, a lot of supplemental contracts for beginning of the year, athletics also. Still, as we're getting ready for the school year, still a lot of moving parts of folks either resigning and or getting hired due to those, and so a lot of moving parts with those. Also increasing the hours for some of our classified staff to try to even out, to make those more equitable or equal, as over the years, due to budget cuts and so forth, those hours have been cut. So trying to to provide some more duties, some more services, some more time with our existing staff, because again, it can be really challenging to find additional staff. And so trying to better utilize our own staff. Also increase in sub rates, trying to be more competitive. Because sometimes folks in classified sub rates competing with other kind of jobs in the community. And so just trying to be a little bit more competitive in those areas. We did not increase the teacher or nurse sub pay. We're extremely competitive in that particular area.
We increased that not too long ago.
Correct.
About a year ago or something.
Correct. Try to,
Yep.
yep.
That's good.
So we probably have the second highest in the county. So we're pretty solid in that. And again, trying to find, again, as a shortage of staff is that our shortage of educators are out there, there's obviously also a shortage of substitutes. So again, trying to make that job enticing along with the requirements of only a 2-year degree or the equivalent of trying to have that combo and trying to ensure that we have enough substitute teachers and substitute staff to be able to take care of our kids. That's it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll on adoption of tonight's consent agenda.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
All right, D, recommend approve the following overnight activities. BHS Boys Golf on the 18th and September 8th, one night only each trip. Trip chaperoned by the 2 coaches. This is only involving 5 students, and the money is covered by the athletic department golf fundraising.
So moved.
Second?
Mrs. Dorn, Mrs. Anderson.
I already gave all the details.
Anybody else? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey.
Yes.
All right, recommend approval for payment in lieu of transportation services for students attending area non-public private schools for the 23-24 school year due to impracticality of providing school district transportation per ORC 3327.02, parentheses B.
So moved.
Second?
Mrs. Dorn, Mrs. Anderson.
These are all within 30 minutes of our school district.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson.
Yes.
So recommend approval of district non-public private school students who are eligible to receive payment in lieu of services for the 23-24 school year based on practicality of school transportation. And so these list of students is in the packet here. Yep.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Anderson and then Mrs. Dorn. Please call the roll.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
Okay. Items of information, board docs. So just to continue to give an update on board docs. So board docs is essentially an online platform or program that would take our agenda and any supporting documents that we would put on there accessible to the public before the meeting. Would also eliminate the need for a hand carry because that information would just be continually updated. And so a couple meetings ago, or maybe it was last meeting, said to move forward with board docs. So we've had a meeting with them already, and so we have set up a training with board docs at the October meeting. So we will plan is to start about a half an hour early. We'll get a meeting notice out, but start a half an hour early, so 6:30 to 7. Board docs would be here to train the board on board docs, and then we would just have the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Working on obviously getting some Chromebooks for the board members so that you can access those beforehand and or during the meeting. So the plan is the October meeting, the first meeting, we'd kind of go parallel still have paper, still do online, just, baby steps of that. And then the next meeting in October, we have 2 meetings in October. The next meeting then, we would just go with board docs at that point on the second meeting in October. So if all goes well, that's the plan for board docs.
So that happened really fast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Like that's amazing. That far exceeds anything that I had imagined in my head. So I'm sure that was a lot of work. Thank you to everybody
Thank you
involved
to
in that.
Sheila Woody, administrative assistant, is taking the lead on that. So I'm going through the training with her, but she's the one that's going to be doing the lead or doing all of the logistics and the work on all, putting the agenda together and so forth.
I know we've made a lot of moves to make things available early, online, stay there, all in the hopes of improving transparency. I know many community members appreciate that. So thank you once again.
You're welcome.
Big thanks to Sheila. She's been doing this way for a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
so to totally shift the entire way you do a good portion of your job, big thank you.
No, I think I asked one time in our agenda prep meetings, I was like, well, what is the financial cost involved? Like, oh, just like tiny couple pennies, whatever. And I was like, Sheila, what is it going to do to your life? Is it going to ruin your life? And she's very amenable, very awesome, and very willing to jump in, which is amazing, that she always is.
She's already figuring it out, and she will figure it out.
Oh, that's
She's a
fine.
problem solver.
I bet.
So we're good. Board members with building liaisons. I know we had this discussion at the last meeting also. I think it was last meeting. We kind of, I think, tabled. We kind of went, if I remember correctly here, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of went just at the beginning of the year, let's get some placements in place just to attend the beginning of the year things, and then let's have another discussion at a future meeting. So, I don't know, if you guys have comments or thoughts, I have comments or thoughts, I don't know which way we want to go first with that.
Well, I brought it up last time, so I guess I can start.
Sure.
I think we're kind of set. Maybe we need to put a couple things more solidly for the beginning of the school year as far as making sure that we're covering all the open houses and the meet the teacher nights and all of that. And as I remember it, Mrs. Anderson had volunteered to take Stephen Bell, Mr. Carpenter at BCI. I was going to take the high school. There was some flux around Kinsey vice Price for the middle school, but I think Mr. Kinsey is interested in joining the middle school. My question to all of you, Dr. Kozak included, is with the 5th board member, we talked about 2 covering the high school because there are so many functions at the high school. Is that preferred, or is having the 5th person kind of be the person that is the liaison to the district offices, to the preschool and anything that happens there, even though technically they're not ours, they are, transportation, the district-wide offices liaison? Is one of those preferred over the other? You don't have to have an opinion now, but.
I think from the volume of the events, the high school and or the middle school, but the high school especially, I think would be helpful to have a second person at the high school.
I'm thinking
I don't know, maybe y'all was thinking this is going to be a whole lot more formal than what I'm thinking is. I think it's just an opportunity to be available, build some relationships, get to know people, obviously not just to staff, administrators, but be available to parents at these functions. So like, I don't see a problem if, hey, I'm on vacation, do you mind, can somebody else, like that,
I think it's just somebody that they can count on.
a dedicated point of contact.
Right,
Just-
but like
just
if
to know
there's
that
something
somebody
at
will be
Stephen
there.
Bell and you guys wanna come, then come,
Right,
I don't think it locks us into, you can only do high school
Sure.
events.
Right.
Yeah.
But having a dedicated point of
Definitely.
contact to know,
Right.
to reach out for something, or just that somebody will be there.
I think it'll be helpful to have a dedicated person at events, scheduled events and things where parents are there and so forth. I think that would be extremely helpful and just kind of, again, you can go to other schools obviously, but just be focused on one school I think would be helpful for those scheduled events and so forth. I think that would be good.
And I trust, I'm sure that as administrators have thoughts, comments on that, I'm sure they're giving them to you, and you can relay those to us also for what their wishes and hopes are.
Okay.
We will work together.
Sounds good.
That's our plan. Okay. Anything else for items for information or discussion? All right, at this time, I'm going to make a motion, and I move that we move into executive session for the purpose of reviewing details relative to the security arrangements and emergency response protocols for a public body per RC 121.22G6. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Dorn seconds. When I think of it, I was mentioned, we're not allowed to make any decisions in there, so any decisions, if there are going to be any result of this, will come out afterwards. And we do have other action afterwards, so stick around, feel free if you want to. But we're not allowed to make any decisions in there, and we're only allowed to talk about this one thing. So. Okay, please call the roll.
Need a second, I think. Did you
Mrs.
make?
Mrs. Dorn,
You
I
first.
went first.
Okay, I
I made the
apologize.
motion, that's okay. Yeah, Mr. Kinsey made the motion, Mrs. Dorn seconded, correct?
True.
Okay, that's okay, no, good.
Right, Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes?
Mr. Kinsey.
Yes. Unanimous. All right, feel free to hang out if you want. All right, so we are back out of the executive session at 8:13 p.m. And if you check out on our agenda here, we're on item H now. So I am making a motion, Mr. Kinsey is making a motion, recommending approval to modify motion number 22-126, which was from September 8th, 2022. Okay, so I'm just going to read what the one simple change is, and then if there's a second, if we move into discussion, we'll explain at length exactly what it is. But one simple change, which is to the third to last bullet in motion number 22-126. And that whole bullet, it begins reading as, complete a minimum of 40 hours of training which exceeds the 24 hours required by the state of Ohio and matches the amount of firearm training required to serve as an armed court officer, bailiff, or probation officer. It's just who picks the training. That's the only change that this is.
And it's not really even a change, it's really just a
Who picks?
clarification, really.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to try to read that again. Let's see if I screw it up. So we are, just to summarize, third to last bullet point of motion 22-126 is still complete a minimum of 40 hours of training, which exceeds the 24 hours required by the state of Ohio and matches the amount of firearm training required to serve as an armed court officer, bailiff, or probation officer in the state of Ohio. These training hours must consist of 24 hours of curriculum that satisfy the state of Ohio pursuant to ORC 5502-703. At least 16 additional hours of curriculum to be assigned by the Active Shooter Response Team Implementation Committee are required. Questions? Okay, Mr. Liming, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson.
Yes.
Very good, motion passes. All right, moving on to letter I, not number I. I'm making a motion to recommend approval of a resolution to appoint certain individuals as members of the district's active shooter response team and authorizing those individuals to have access to and possess a deadly weapon or ordinance in a school safety zone. Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay, Mr. Kinsey moved and Mrs. Anderson seconded. So this is a new additional list of volunteers that have stepped up. We previously approved an initial list of volunteers. And these are folks that thought about it, which rightly you should. It's fantastic that people take it extremely seriously, want to meditate on it, think about it. And these are additional folks that want to step up and serve in this volunteer role. Once again, I can't thank them enough, not as a board member, but as a dad who has small children in these buildings. These folks see the need for a multi-layered, comprehensive safety plan, and I cannot thank them enough for stepping up. Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes,
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
motion passes. Okay, I would like to move to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Kinsey and Mrs. Dorn. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey.
Yes, we are adjourned at 8:20 p.m. Thank you very much.